Hi, this is Carolyn Dubose, and I wanted to touch base with you as you go into conferring with your readers. I know that many of you had a chance to go to the library this week with your students. One of the things we focused on during this summer's reading workshop with the teachers that attended is how important it is to have conferences with readers to help them make meaning of what they're reading and to also help build their skills. So I wanted to offer you a strategy that we shared with the readers this summer when we were training them in the Reader's Workshop. And one of the things that will really help you when you go shoulder to shoulder with those students for their reading conferences is to have what I like to think of as a cheat sheet. And that is this wonderful little index card spiral. And I've started putting mine together. And what this does is it allows me some questions that I can use with students as I go into my conferences with them. On the right side, you can see these tabs, and some of them may look somewhat familiar. For example, this is simply the bookmarks that I gave you, and I simply put them into this small spiral because I thought it would just be easier to have them all in one place. So I started with that, and I used just starting, early in the book, far into the book, and end of the book. So I did this so that I would have something handy to take with me. Then I went into Penny Kittle's book, and I actually went to page 80, and she's got a wonderful chapter on conferring. And this section is all about monitoring a reading life, asking kids, what are you reading? How much did you read last year? And to try to build their reading skills. I then went further into her book, the Conferring chapter on page 82, and this is teaching a reading strategy. So remember that engagement is always job one. You know, we want them to have joy, but we also want them to be engaged. And even if it's a really hard book, interest trumps reading ability every time. And the final chapter I added based on Penny Kittle's writing is this one, Increasing Complexity and Challenge. And that's from Book Love, page 84. And as you can see, in this section and also in the prior one, although I didn't show you, is I wrote down a whole lot of questions that she actually had in her chapter. And it's going to be so much easier to use this as my resource when I have my readers' conferences. And remember, our readers' conferences are only about 7 to 10 minutes long. Another resource that I used, and I'm going to pan over to this, is the Fontness and Pinnell Genre Prompting Guide. And this is a handy reference. All of the junior highs have copies, and we actually have one also on our campus. And it has some wonderful questions that we can ask students as we go and have our conferences with them. And at the bottom, I have separate tabs. This one is about genre, and it's got tons and tons of questions, but I only took the ones that I particularly liked. And so I wrote down several of the questions having to do with genre, and then I also wrote down several questions having to do with character. Who are the most important characters, people or animals in this story? How does the author make the characters believable? And so these are some questions that I would ask students as I have a reading conference with them. And finally, please remember that when we have our reading conferences, as I said before, they're only about 7 to 10 minutes long, and there are various sections of it, and I've sent that to you in a separate email. But when we leave them, we want to leave them with a teaching tip or a teaching point, something we want them to try in their reading. And so I might leave them with a strategy, and I'm going to write it in my notebook or on my Post-it note for my student, and then they're going to go to perhaps the last 4 pages of their reader's notebook and write down the task that I asked them to work on. It might be develop a character chart and write details and evidence from your text to prove your point. And I'm going to write that in my notes too, so that next time when we get together, we'll all know where we're trying to develop our reading skills. Thanks for listening. This is Carolyn Dubose.